We were always lucky that we could do anything we wanted. If we were not good at something, our motto was we get good at it early on and we do it, right? I mean, we did a vertical takeoff and a landing electric aircraft for Airbus. That story is really hilarious because I went to the German consulate and talked to a gentleman there, his name's Zach, who works for Airbus. And I said, in the future, like in the Star Wars universe, I had a few drinks in me, but I said, in the Star Wars universe, there's traffic everywhere, right? If you go to like Coruscant, there's just lanes of traffic. We have all these axes to fly in, and we have supercomputers and stuff. Like, don't you think why is there traffic in space, in 3D space? And he started laughing. And so that's how we got this account. He and I became friends. Mercedes is really fascinating because they'll spend €1 million on a concept car easily, and then they'll just use the mirrors, for a car, later down the line, just because they can, right? They're Mercedes, right? It's
That's the saddest thing in the world, I think, the design that is never implemented.
Yeah, agreed. Or just poorly, right? And you look at it also as a factory, right? The people at the end of the line have the most power. You need to become really good friends with everyone on the production chain early on, because otherwise it's just the whole thing is never going to work. At Mercedes, if I didn't have the relationship with the engineering team then to be open to trying new technology, we never would have been able to build the systems that we did.
Patrick, welcome to Product Craft.
I'm excited to be here. Very honored. Thank you, Arseni, for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. When I was thinking about starting this podcast, I wanted to talk with people who have dedicated their lives to the craft of making products. And with each conversation, my own understanding of craft continues to evolve. You are one of the best designers I know, and I'm also fortunate to call you a friend. You worked at some of the top design agencies in San Francisco, such as Method and Attic. You worked in-house at one of the world's most famous automotive company, Mercedes. And you also opened and continue to run your own agency called Airlift. And you had some amazing success with that. You worked with leading brands ranging from Facebook, Adidas, Nissan, and even artists like Marshmello. But your biography is just a small part of your story. And I'm really, really excited to learn more about you. And your craft. So really excited that you joined.
Thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it. You're too kind. Too many kind words.
To kick us off, I wanted to ask you, what motivated you to begin your design career? I know you went to college to become a fine artist. And what happened then?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I kind of always knew I was a designer as well as an artist. It's interesting. I don't really put a lot of emphasis on what I am. I just try and just do the things that I enjoy, and that is what it is. So, when I was in high school, there was a vocational school that had it was called commercial art back then. I think I was probably 15 years old, and I had to convince my mom to go into this vocational school, and they essentially conned her into thinking commercial art really wasn't art. And so she finally admitted that all the products in the world have to be designed by somebody. I was kind of sitting at a restaurant, and I think I picked up a salt shaker or something and said, let's see this, mom, someone had to design the salt shaker and the logo on it. And that's really kind of how I got into design. But I got also into design through music. I think you and I have an affinity for music and the intersection between design and music. And so that actually was a really quite a large catalyst back then, because electronic music was still in its very much infancy, what we know it today, and especially in the 90s. And so that was another really an entry point. And then in college, it really was a way of helping pay for food at night.
Were you DJing, producing music, or listening?
No, I was listening to music. My friend Aaron Shen and I, he still is a very close friend, but he was really in electronic music. And so I would go to school studying fine art and painting and sculpture and photography. And then in the evening, he and I would go out and go to clubs and listen to music and buy records and go to record shops and everything, and then look at the artwork that was coming out of Europe, specifically London and UK. And that's also very much how I got into the design. And just, we were always in awe because so many good design came out of Europe, more very much in the London scene with music. And so a lot of the kind of innovative artists that were working with musicians back then were trying to push design and trying to push their craft through really the computer, right? Which is very rudimentary back then. I mean, we had freehand and we had very simple tools, but there was something really kind of pretty spectacular about using those simple tools.
Yeah. Do you remember, like, maybe it's a hard question to answer, but when you mentioned that, you were explaining to your mom that, like, look, things need to be designed and somebody designs them. What was it in you that sort of sparked that interest to even think about creating things or making them better? Where do you think that is stemming from?
That's a really good question, Arseni. I really I don't know how to answer. It's so fascinating. I think there was a side of me that just wanted to do art, and but it was a way of getting into. I mean, there's always this philosophical debate on whether or not art is design and design is art. And so I always say there's a lot of artists masquerading as designers, even today, right? Because their culture doesn't really support art, unfortunately, the way
Hmm.
design does. Because again, design is really about serving consumption, and it's really about serving capitalism and in many ways, right? Especially United States. So I think that I always knew I wanted to do art, but I was willing to do design as a compromise, as it were. And
Hmm.
so I think early on, I just wanted to be in the process of making things because that's really what how I find satisfaction in my life and how I make sense out of life, right? Is just the process of making anything and being around other people who are making things.
That's an interesting theme to explore about design versus art. Obviously very old theme, but so art, obviously that's more about self-expression. Design, one way to say, is serving capitalism, as you said, or meeting the needs of other people in practical ways. Like, do you find self-expression in design, and what's your take on this kind of balance between art and design?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Arseni. Regardless of whether or not we're consciously aware of um, putting our own, I would say, personality or artistic soul on something, even if it's for a design solution, I still think it comes out, it manifests itself out of us, right? And so um, I think people always say, "Oh, the designer has a style." I think that's in many ways the expression of soul, like, the expression of self through into craft that's coming out of something into the design, right? It's seeping itself into the work. And I think that's just human behavior. And I've always tried to have an agnostic kind of view in terms of design and how expression plays a role in that on behalf of the client. Because again, we all have personalities, we all have language, right? We all have backgrounds that make us and shape us and who we are. And in many ways, I think craft and the way craft gets applied to the overall process of creation and specifically design in this instance, I think that you're always going to have a little piece of it inside the work
So, do you think
yourself.
it's inevitable? Do you think it's inevitable to have a style, or is it something that designer works on to develop?
It's important to emulate or at least learn how to design and try and figure out how something is created, and then through the process of doing that, then you establish who you are, and then
Hmm.
you start. I like to call these things your toolkit, because they become standards by what jazz musicians call standards, right? And so I think as designers, you have standards, right? You have something that you can pull from to solve a problem. I think the challenge then becomes sometimes those standards also have expression kind of woven in them as well, right? Which is part of your personality and it's part of your expression of as a human being. But again, I really think it's important to not put too much emphasis on that for on behalf of the client, because again, if you're doing something on the behalf of someone else, you're really a conduit or a vehicle for solving that problem, right? For a client, right? Such as a car manufacturer or whomever, right?
Hmm.
Because I see this happen a lot of times when someone is making something that their expression comes out too much and they can only do one thing over and over and over again, right? And so to use another music analogy, it's sort of like becoming a really good studio musician where you can bring them in and use them for different genres of music, but they're versed in jazz and rock and classical. So they're able to kind of pull from all these different types of genres, right, in order to create a new type of music, or to work with someone, right, to create their
Yeah.
own kind of vision of music.
It's interesting what you said about not like imposing your own style, let's say, onto a client or to the onto the brand. It's also probably important to consider, and maybe sometimes it's tricky to work with a brand that has an established identity or a particular like look and feel already. Kind of, this is how people perceive this brand. And then as a designer, when you come in, how do you feel about kind of to adapt to that language, visual language framework or brand framework? Like, do you need to like it to be able to work, or do you find ways to like work around it? Like, what if it doesn't resonate fully?
Yeah, I mean, that's funny. I think I laugh because so many times I think, my wife, as you know, is a designer as well, and is the co-founder of Airlift. And so she and I
Hmm.
always we always said, and you can make any project an interesting project if you think about it hard enough. Like, there's always something to learn in something, even if it's bad, right? So
Hmm.
whether or not you philosophically or agree with something or not, you can at least inherently find something good in something. I believe that, right?
Hmm.
I mean, a lot of times you'll get a design system that is just done by someone who's frankly not competent in doing any design system, and yet they think they're the most
Hmm.
incredible designer since, Saul Bass. So again, I think you can also find that ego and the way ego works and manifests itself in the work. And when you get, I always say I don't want to be an invasive species, and people laugh at that joke because, again, I'm coming into a new design system. I'm going to give you my opinions, but I'm going to embrace it, because especially if there's hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars that already been spent on this design system, and you inherently know it's bad and it does not solve the problem, and that you're going to have all these different issues, you have to kind of be like a tai chi master and kind of like move it in a way. And I also, Dinah, my wife, and I also say you always want someone to think it's their idea as well, especially when you're working with something that you don't agree with
Hmm.
philosophically, or from a, again, it doesn't solve the problem.
What are some of the methods that maybe you use in those situations? Like, so you described now, let's say you discover a design system or something, you don't agree with it, you think it can be much better, but also there is other people, there is ego involved. Like, what are some of the ways that you deliver that message that maximizes the chances of it being heard?
Yeah, in a tactful way. Yeah, I actually, it's taken years. I mean, again, at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? So we're driven by a lot of the same things, and it's just inherently the way it is. So I find that early on when I meet someone, or when especially if it's a large engagement and I don't agree with the design language or the system, but it's also about establishing trust early on. And the way you establish trust is through learning how that group of people, or that individual who has the power, how they talk, what words they use, what they believe in, why they did what they did, what situation they were in when they created the language, right? Or whatever you're going into. I guess I'm using this on an example of, like, you're an outside designer going into work for a new company, or work for something that's already established, right? So, and even on new clients and new accounts, I really try and understand who the person is, right? Where are they from? Where do they come from?
Hmm.
What their language is. A lot of times, we'll say one thing and we'll mean totally different thing, right? So it's again about finding that common language. And so if you're using the common language early on with someone, you're establishing trust. And so if you're establishing trust with the team or individual you're working with, that you don't agree with the design language, typically you're able to shape that language, right, and help channel it and move it in ways. And you're also, there's a lot more legwork involved with some of that stuff too, right? Just, did you ever try this, right? And they're like, no, we didn't really ever try that. We tried that, it doesn't really work. And it's like, well, what about these other three things? And then I think showing someone respectfully, like, hey, what did you think about this? Like, I understand, like, it sucks when we did this, right? So again, it's about being like,
Hmm.
yeah, I have empathy for you, and I really understand, like, how hard it is to create really great work in this giant organization you're working in. At the same time, maybe these are two or three things we can do, or one thing, and here's examples of those things. And so again, you have to do that tactfully, right? Once you establish a little bit of trust. And again, there's empathy, a lot of empathy involved, where you have to be like, I really hear you, man. Like, I really understand where you're at. And I think that's something you can do as a designer.
Does it mean that, and correct me if I'm wrong, does it mean that you are not rushing to show the new design, quote unquote? Like, let's say you're working on a brand system or something, you're not going right away in the first meeting and be like, well, what do you think about this design? Look, I changed everything. Like, isn't it great? Like, does it mean that you're going through a process where you sort of start with breaking things down almost like on an architectural level, even not even showing visual things? Or do you try to, or maybe you do try to show and engage people, showing the visual right away?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're unhappy with, right? So like you can have really great design systems that are functionally are incredible, right? They're just absolutely incredible, but they have no expression or personality or what we would call brand expression, right? And then you could have the vice versa. You could have aesthetics, right? And just complete rampant, like horrible functionality, but it's like the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your entire life, right? So again, it's really the convergence of form and function. And really understanding like what really the problem is here. What are you unhappy with? And again, like, is it purely just your ego? I always joke too that, you know, working these corporations and only designer teams is like everyone wants to be the top chef sometimes, and especially at some of the best design companies and frankly some of the best design institutions. Or like Mercedes Benz was very much a fight or flight mentality. So you always had someone who's trying to add a little more salt in the soup, and then you have just like a really salty soup. So there's a lot of like maneuvering going on. That's like, well, I'm going to show them this, and this is really what the problem is as well. So it becomes sort of like more political in that way, I guess, and really how you could shape the system.
How important are, like, navigating politics and dynamics in sort of making sure that the work goes through and is being like heard? Like, how important is it to form, alliances and relationships, maybe
Yeah.
with executives?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting of the last, 30 years of doing design. I think now it's more important than ever to do that. I think we saw a shift in the 2010s where, especially when design was, you had larger tech companies were relying less on agencies to do the design work, and they were building their own design teams in house. And I think that's really where it became more about political maneuvering and more about how to make sure that design intention from the beginning, from the concept all the way to the execution is, because as you know, Arsenia, working these large organizations, the design intention can get lost very quickly. So you always need to have someone, I feel, regardless of whether or not you realize it and how important it is that's really going to champion the work, not just on design, but also on engineering, also on, all the way to QA, all the way across the board. Because so many times, we spend, an unbelievable amount of time designing and making sure and really protecting it. And they're like, here it is. And then it gets handed off, and then it just gets destroyed, right? Because again, the bridge between design and execution was weak. And so I think that's where it gets really important to build those relationships with people. And again,
Yeah.
real quickly at Mercedes, if I didn't have the relationship with the engineering team then, to be open to trying new technology, we never would have been able to build the systems that we did for a car, right? For car systems, because we were building everything with postscripts, like postscript data, like just old school PSDs, chopping them up, exporting them. We have to hire another company to test it. It was a €500,000 to test it. And I was like, why aren't we just using like a 3D environment, right? First, like we just build the whole thing in 3D. We could build these tools that designers can use, and then we can hand it over to engineering, and then they can use the same tools that design is using to QA it, to push it out, right? And then we can use NVIDIA hardware to run it in real time. So there's so many benefits. And then not only that, if we have a bug or we have anything, we can address it early, throughout the entire process, right? And we could do new concepts, we could build all these new things. And so again, if I had this was literally over a coffee, probably by a water cooler. If I
Hmm.
had didn't have that and get excited about that and have them get excited about it, we would have lost it and it never would have pushed out the way it did.
That's an amazing story. What is the advice that you would give in terms of establishing for a designer who wants to establish trust with their engineering counterpart?
Get to know them. Yeah. I mean, seriously, I mean, the kind of the rivalry between engineering and design is as old as the probably the um the Roman pantheon. It's funny because
It's
yeah,
the question of comparison design and art.
yeah, it is. Yeah, very much so, right? And I actually I really think that's really fascinating because I really try and code. Like seriously as a designer, like try and code. Like it's fucking hard. And it's really hard and really get an understanding of like how things are built because get out of Figma, get in like literally pick up an HTML book, basic, like you can learn it in like a couple days and just play and see how hard it is and be like, wow, they have a lot. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a room, an engineering team comes in and they're really aggressive. Design is going to do this thing and they're going to tell us how to do this and na. And it's like, I want to know how you're going to build it. How are we going to build it? Right. And Dinah and I also always said we need to design engineering at kickoff all the time. We want to know how you're building it, what tools you're going to use. Are there any technologies we can use in our design process that's going to make it better? That we are not even aware of. Like, is there anything you're excited about, right? That's going to make it so much better. And as I said, get to know them, right? Get to know like their world.
Yeah, I resonate with that 100%. I used to back in the days do some coding like yeah, HTML, then I learned some PHP, some JavaScript. So that was great. I mean, then I quickly realized that, like actual engineers are way better at that. I
Yeah,
think through I always was interested and fascinated. Like, I would have a lot of friends who are engineers, and I just remember, spending hours and hours like about trying to understand what are you guys working on? How does this work? How does that work? Those are very valuable things for designers to really invest time in doing to show interest, like genuine, especially if you're genuinely interested, because that provides a lot more understanding of how to then implement it. Because then otherwise we're just creating designs that like that's the saddest thing in the world, I think, the design that is never implemented.
yeah, agreed. Or just poorly, right? And you
Yeah.
look at it also as a factory, right? The people at the end of the line have the most power. I mean, really, because
Yeah.
they're the ones who actually make sure that the product or service goes out the way it's supposed to. And so you need to become really good friends with everyone on the production chain early on, because otherwise it's just the whole thing is never going
Yeah.
to work. No, I mean, this is where I have a frustration with Gantt charts and like compartmentalization that a lot of like technology companies like have is that, oh, we're going to put you over in this wing and this silo's here and this silo's here and that silo. And I've talked to so many recruiters in tech that are work for some of the largest tech companies in the world. And they're just like, they don't understand that I'm like, I work across disciplines. It's really what my job is to really understand like all the different permutations as much as possible, because that's what makes design effective. And they can't, their heads can't, well, you're a UX designer. It's like, no, I am, but I also do UI, I do brand, I can code. Like it makes it sound like you're just playing, and it's like, no, I feel like you really have to understand like everyone's world and really get an understanding of how design, to your point, I mean, the hunger to understand, to learn, to improve yourself, to grow, that all inherently needs to be embraced. And so anyway, I just wanted to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
a nod about
This is
that.
that's a very important note, and it's like I already see like three different themes that we can go to. But this last one that you mentioned about, like, in the example that you gave with the recruiter, them thinking that, well, this is the job responsibility, that's what you do, and that's not about that. The
Yeah,
crazy thing is that, like, I've been as part of this like exploration in this series, I'm talking with more people, and what I'm seeing is design is misunderstood. The role of design is
Mm.
misunderstood. And I was actually thinking, well, maybe something wrong with me. Like maybe I'm not the, good communicator or something like that. No, like it is a problem across like pretty much everybody that I speak with, especially people who are more senior, who kind of have that breadth of knowledge and understanding what it takes to really make things happen. But at large, unfortunately, there is still weirdly this very narrow thinking of like, well, design is closely related with aesthetics. So it's about the aesthetic
Yeah.
layer. And
Well,
that, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Go on,
go
Arsetic.
ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt. But I think because I believe also we're all born creative as humans. And so
Hmm.
the role that design plays is totally different than what people think it is. And to your point, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of people think it's like just moving pretty pictures around. And so that's really, inherently, I mean, in many ways it can be, right? But it's not. It's really, design for me is really just a vehicle to help like again be that conduit and that bridge between ideas to execution. And so that's really in essence what design is.
It's becoming harder for more senior designers to even find a job these days because there
Yeah.
is a tendency to hire like younger people with less experience. Nothing wrong with that, but almost like the rationale behind it and the motivation is almost like, well, they can just execute specific thing, not question too much. Like, not that it's also like economically
Mhm.
more fitting, but also kind of from perspective of like they're not going to ask too many questions, which is sad
Sure.
to me. Yeah.
I mean, I agree that, I mean, maybe it's because you and I we're a little older now, and but I have noticed that. Uh, I mean, you have a lot of. I think you brought up a couple things. You have the reducing the bottom line thing happening, and then you also have a lot of, again, a shift, I believe, since the 2010s, and now in where you have data and analytics guiding a lot of these systems to the point where
Hmm.
they're sort of being automated. And so there are a lot of a lot of people that feel like there's more of a certainty for execution and for really what certainty is in design. And so you need hands essentially at that point, right? And I think that's true to some extent, but definitely not, because that's where innovation and also opportunity kind of intersect and actually really propel design um, into really a whole new realm of kind of a renaissance with what a company can do. And frankly, there's still, it's 2025 now, and there's still like, dude, what have they what are, what's going, why are these like this still, right? There's so many things that we could be improving with design and also engineering and also everything. So as I said, there's multiple things happening. I feel there's the kind of, and definitely the analytics side of things that I'm seeing happen in design.
You mean with the companies that we use kind of day to day, why are they
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
innovating and changing more?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, you touched on a big thing about like the overall kind of industrialization and kind of standardization, which it's interesting, like especially connected to the whole conversation about style.
Mhm.
And at the same time, if we look today at a lot of out of the box design system, a lot of frameworks, and another big theme is AI prototyping, like to the conversation about playing with code, which I want to tap into as well. But how do you feel about this movement towards the standardization and just things looking and feeling more or less the same everywhere you go in terms of at least digital product design?
I mean, um, so many industries are doing that, right, beyond just product design. But it's funny, like when I listen to music, especially if it's been made in the last year or two, it sounds very similar to everything, right? It's all very homogenized, and no offense to any new artists. I mean, there's plenty of really great music that's not quote unquote popular. There's a there's a formula, right, that's being applied to a lot of things. So my worry is that we're moving away from innovation and we're moving away from opportunity so much that we're relying on these systems that we're not questioning them, right? We're not questioning things enough, right? So that's where I have a concern about, not just from an ethical standpoint, but also from like, well, did you ever think about doing it this way? Because as you know, those if you're designing and using data from a bell curve, you're missing the fringe work, the fringe kind of ideas on the sides of the bell curve that's really where you get a lot of really great insight. I mean, as you know, I think we work with Kat Holmes on her book Inclusive Design by on
Oh, I
MIT.
didn't know that.
You know, she's a very good friend of mine, and she really believes in the fact that there's missed opportunities if you're just kind of only like, okay, everyone's got two pairs of hands and they're only two eyes and two hands, and that's the thing. And because if you're looking at all again where opportunity is beyond the kind of bell curve, that's really what we should be doing. And so again, AI and machine learning are really trained on the sum of humanity. And so if you're using again that kind of band, that you
Hmm.
essentially have a high and low pass filter you're applying to everything. And so as a result, you're really not seeing beyond that or hearing.
Is that because of the desire to minimize risk? Like, let's just go the way that's
Yeah.
been traveled.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I really believe that, right? Because I mean, look at the explosive growth that technology has had over the last, I mean, really since the advent of the internet and the advent of the mobile phone, right? 2008, really the iPhone, right? So, in kind of the spectrum of things and the way the explosive growth has a market opportunity. Well, we want explosive growth over and over and over again, right? So, as a result, I think the market is actually in many ways dictating the way these really in many ways the way these organizations should operate, who they should hire, how they should judge what is a
Hmm.
good opportunity, what isn't a good opportunity, and really what's going to be the best interest for the corporation and very much for the shareholders, right? And so again, I think you can make tremendous strides in growth for for companies and also for everyone, societal benefit, if you're not relying so much on only these systems, right? Because in many ways they're a tool. And I'm speaking specifically to AI and ML.
What would be some of the practical ways that we can inject more innovation and experimentation in commercial environments?
Yeah, that's a really good question, honestly, Arseni. I mean, I again, not to to go back to your original question, where it really was like there's not enough like old guard people who are really
Hmm.
running these organizations or these creative teams that are pushing people in all these other ways of thinking and doing. And so it also needs to happen on that level. But I think we as artists, or designers, or any engineers or project managers or whoever we are, my ask would be just to stay curious with everything, right? And not rely on everything that everyone's telling you, or really think as much as you can about how to improve something and not rely on these systems too much, right? So I feel like everyone's operating on a deficit right now, like emotional and also a capital deficit just in general. I feel like in light of COVID and the post COVID world that we live in, you have to have energy to do this too. And so that's where my concern is as well, right? I feel like we're losing that ability to be critical as well, critical thinking. But in
Yeah.
terms of a solution, I don't know.
I
I
mean,
think we all have to try a little harder, right? And not rely so much on everything.
have you had situations when you feel that you were happy with the outcome when you started working with an established company that already had, a lot of legacy, and then you were able to come in and actually inject change and that breath of fresh air? Do things come up like that have actually happened?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do. I think a good example is Zeiss, right? We worked with the optics
Hmm.
manufacturer. We won a Red Dot award last year for the work we did for Zeiss. And there are really fantastic opportunities still as designers to look at how you can really have a lot of impact on systems that are already established that need a lot of help, right? So this was very much a collaborative project that happened really with the client, right? With Zeiss, our partner. They were a tremendous partner. We worked with Dick and Isaacs as well, who's ex IDEO, who now is at Box Clever. We work with Presence Engineering to help build the back end systems with the Zeiss team. So,
Hmm.
um, we're very fortunate to have that relationship, right? And they understood that this was a massive project that really needed to change. Really, what this system does, the software, is it helps look inside semiconductors, non-intrusive radar, usually used in medical or manufacturing as a silicon production. So you can
Hmm.
look inside solid objects without opening them up, right?
What's the use case again? You can look inside of non-living
Yeah,
objects. Is it
yeah.
like an
So
X-ray?
essentially, it's like an X-ray machine, very, very complicated, very accurate. Every object that we know has a resonance frequency, and so you're able to create 3D objects using a resonance frequency. So it's way more complicated than I can even explain on the show. But
Hmm.
this is where I rely on my team, right, to help get an understanding of how these things work. We did a lot of user testing. What's wrong with the current system? It was really not functioning very well. I mean, again, rightfully so. It was designed by engineering and solely by engineers,
Hmm.
and so that's where I think the opportunity is really understanding engineers' point of view. Talking to professional people who are using it at universities to do research, but also students too, right? Who are just getting started to learn how to use it.
What was the catalyst for Zeiss to decide to redesign the product, bring in amazing designers, and like really take this bold move, right? Like that takes a lot of courage. And what was the catalyst to do that?
I think honestly, it was yeah, this just isn't working. We're hearing feedback from people. It's too complicated. It's something that they were not proud of internally and externally. Like they wanted to be the best, right? Not just from an optics standpoint, but also from a software standpoint. And so they definitely knew that there was also an opportunity, right, to improve this. I mean, there was a competitive analysis done too. So they just wanted to stay at the forefront. And again, this is where I really admire working for Zeiss or Mercedes or companies like that, where they really trying to aspire to be the best at everything they do. And again, that's many of the reasons why I live in Japan, right? There's just kind of this embodying spirit of being trying to make every day better than it was before.
Yeah. This is an amazing project. Like I mentioned it to you
Yeah.
before. Like, first of all, congratulations on the red dot. That's probably every designer's dream. How did it feel? Was it your first one, or
No, I have like 100. No, it was definitely our first. My wife actually went to the opening in Berlin, and she had never been to Berlin. I did not go. I was like, I'm going to stay in Japan. I'm going to stay in Kyoto, um, in November and have fun. It was an honor. It's not the most sexy. Again, this is where style people are like, oh, looks, whatever. But it's like extremely complicated. Do all these components,
I think it's
and also,
incredible. I mentioned it to, sorry to cut you off. Like I mentioned to before that with my current role at Clearly, it's basically also we do CCTA analysis to detect disease in coronary arteries like plaque, and so it has to do also with image analysis. And so when I saw this, like it very deeply resonated with me, no pun intended, resonance. and And so it is actually like for such a complex software, yeah, like I can see that you managed to do a lot of work to figure out the workflows, the layouts, and I'm sure that it looks, 10 million times better. Not just looks. You see, I guess I made a mistake too. Like it's
see,
not just
yeah,
about it's not about the look. It's about the workflow first and foremost, right?
that's
And
right.
then the look is secondary.
But it was, I mean, just to speak about the look, the component library, the Zeiss team in Germany. as an incredible team building components to create standards across all of their software, right? All their hardware.
Mm.
So we had an opportunity to work on helping establish new components, new ways of lighting typography, iconography, and also working very closely with the team in Germany. Because again, whatever we're building in our corner of the universe is going to affect the larger ecosystem, the sphere of work that Zeiss is going to this is rolling out right across all of their products and services.
So essentially, this design system, yeah. So it's going to be. Is it already utilized at other
It
products?
is. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Were you participating with engineering while this was being implemented? Like, what was the process there?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, there was a lot of prototyping going on early to show engineering how the system is functioning and how things are kind of evolving and what the input should be from the engineering team and how that might affect design early on so we can course correct, right? Because we don't want to go too far down a road that we can't back out from and we've invested too much time and energy on something. So again, this is where getting engineering on early in the project, really talking to them, really understanding how the system's being built, what limitations, right? Or also
Hmm.
opportunities are. Because again, I like to understand like, hey, if we you do this type of animation, it's going to destroy everything. Or if you do this, sometimes maybe there's a really better solution in there, right?
So this is a super complex domain. I imagine you had no idea about what this technology is when you started. What was your process to figure out how to even do the design? What informed the design and the design decisions?
Yeah, it's interesting. We did this project right before COVID was happening, and so we were able to meet them, go check out the equipment, check out the current software, and it was an exhaustive amount of questions we had, and we had a really great partnership with so many people there who were so patient with us to understand, and they acknowledge the fact, hey, this is really complicated stuff. Like this is literally cutting edge technology that's definitely above a lot of everyone's pay grades to understand, but we're going to get you up to speed as much as we can. And that again, there was that kind of deep passion, not just from us, but also from Zeiss to really work together as a team. And again, there's only a handful of clients and partners that we have where everything will always get done and it will get done really well, but to have a very wonderfully collaborative relationship early on in the project, again, Zeiss was one of those clients and partners we had. So again, that's really in essence how it really worked.
How long did it take from kickoff to, let's say, completion of designs? And actually, did the engineering start implementation while design process was still underway, or did you first create all of the design and then they kicked off implementation?
It's definitely a waterfall approach, right? We're trying to
Okay.
give people as much as we can early on so that they can get up to speed because there's never this clear, as you know, like, okay, like here's everything, like good luck. It's really just giving everyone enough opportunity, enough time to understand the design language and the functionality, and also to even get their thoughts and feedback right early on because I don't want to put pressure on anyone that doesn't need it, right? I want people to feel like that they're empowered to do the best work. And also, the only way you really do that is to give everyone as much information as you can as early as possible. So again, that's being respectful to someone else's profession, their discipline as well, and their craft.
So how long was it, like the
It's
design and
about
discuss?
so I think we started talking in 2020 and then COVID happened. We were working on it in 2019, 20, and then I would like to acknowledge the fact that all of this work was done almost entirely remote. This was
Hmm.
extremely complicated software, um, in multiple countries across multiple time zones, and so the naysayers on can't work remote and do great work. I totally disagree with them. I think you can do that if you have a really great communication and tools and processes and put in place. So we were fortunate to have had that,
Hmm.
but it took about 2.5, 3 years. I would say, yeah, it
Yeah,
was
that's
pretty large.
That's amazing. Yeah, like I also personally 100% agree about remote work. Like I've had experience working remotely. Yeah, for so many years, I used to have a remote engineering team. And like essentially, we would have design in San Francisco, engineering, on the other part of the world. And everything was totally possible and is still possible. What were the tools that you used? I guess it doesn't matter as much, but like which project management tool did you use on that one for communication?
I think, I mean, it was really just, I think we used
Email,
Slack then. Slack,
Slack?
email. I mean, it was mostly Slack, and we might have used Teams. I can't remember, but it's either Slack or Teams. But and then I think they used Jira, which we had I'm not a big fan of Jira as a designer. Yeah, and actually we used a lot of Gantt charts. I'm fortunate enough that my wife and I love making Gantt charts, and we love making timelines
Hmm.
because that's something I also think everyone should really understand how to do is like how much time is it really going to take me to do something and then giving that to whoever you're working with as early as possible and getting them to really pay attention because no one wants to look at this thing like no one wants to be worried about what's coming down the pipe too much. I want to make sure that everyone understands like you have to kind of pre-frame as much as possible and so as a result the tools and processes and procedures we use again, it's really just getting everything out on the table as early as possible, right? And
Yeah.
really doing your job and not being like, well, I'm just gonna coast. I see that happening a lot.
Were there any surprises in terms of the implementation, since that was kind of a waterfally approach, as you said?
Yeah.
Let's say when they started implementing, like, oops, we cannot do that actually. Sorry.
No, I mean honestly, there it's really crazy to say this, but I don't like having surprises unless they're good surprises like oh that looks better than what we thought right that's
Hmm.
or it functions even better like it should where's the bar and so I think if you establish like the height of the bar and like the length of the bar and before you build it
Yeah.
you're not going to have any surprises right so I think it's funny when I worked at this I won't name it but I worked at a I worked at an advertising studio advertising company and I think at one point I was like dude I totally cannot work here anymore and it was I was doing the design guidelines the brand guidelines while I was also like doing the design and the branding at the same time they're like hey we need the guidelines send us the guidelines I'm like dude we're not even done with the campaign of the work like I can't do it unless we're done and then I realized, that a lot of these people don't understand the process of anything, or they're not even willing to learn it, right? Which I was like, okay, this is just a lost cause. I'm gonna abandon ship. I was a young rebel designer back then.
I was gonna actually pull up another project of yours, if you don't mind. I have an idea of what I wanted to ask you about, but let me ask you, like, because you have amazing range, like from brands that everybody knew to the city of San Francisco
Yeah,
to Facebook,
sure.
Marshmello.
And there's a lot of work that we didn't even put on the website the last 2 years. A lot more Google work, a lot more Stripe work, with their design language. Um, a ton of work on
Yeah.
Stripe.
Can we talk about Mercedes a little
Sure.
bit?
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, I think everybody knows Mercedes. The work is top notch, high quality. I know you work there in house
I
for how
did.
long? For a year, 2 years?
No, yeah, it was about so they were my client for a year and then I was like I had a I have a friend and mentor who said, if you really want to help and really change the way in which we're doing the work here, I think you should be in house, right? Because again, it's about championing the work and being really in it to a point where you're just getting obsessed about it. So I was there, I mean, technically 1 year full time and then another year, so 2 years of my life. And then but we worked with them after I started Airlift because
Mm.
I had the honor of working with them a lot after I left Mercedes. So over the years, I've done a lot of concept cars for them, a lot of consulting. Even just in like, hey, how does AI work in our systems, right? How does it how do it when it's active, when it isn't active? I mean, there's all kinds of work that we've done for them.
How did it feel to get into the car that you helped to design and take it for a ride? Did you have that opportunity?
I don't think I ever have because the systems are in the A class, the G wagon. The A class was
Mm.
I don't think it's available still in the United States. The G wagon, I did have a G wagon, but I had an old one. I didn't have the new one. My boss,
Hmm.
Hartmut Sinkowitz, who is the head of interior design at Mercedes, he was working on it and telling me about it. And he's like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna put you're gonna put the design language that you guys worked on inside of it." You're such a big cog in a large machine that a lot of times you have no idea. Is like, are they actually going to do this or are they not? Right? Mercedes is really fascinating because they'll spend €1 million on a concept car easily, and then they'll just use the mirrors, for a car, later down the line, or they'll spend 80,000 euros on a on milling a solid chair out of solid aluminum just because they can, right? Because they're Mercedes, right?
Hmm.
We're and there's always a rivalry between Porsche and Audi, specifically Audi and Mercedes. It was really fascinating to work there and also be a part of that culture.
Not that many people have both worked in house as well as then through a consulting, right, with the same essentially client.
Yeah, it's very strange.
How do you feel? When were you more successful and satisfied in terms of the work output?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You mean in terms of like seeing it come to life into the
Not
world,
necessarily
or
like when were you able to make, bigger dent, so to speak, or you felt more proud of the results, or you were more effective?
probably in house? Earlier in the conversation, we talked about being there to represent the work. And so I always joke that Mercedes Benz working there was sort of like watching Game of Thrones episode without the sex and violence, which was like the most interesting part of the political sphere of the Game of Thrones stuff is. And so you're just sitting in these rooms talking like politically, like, okay, the Lannisters are gonna consolidate power, and then so there's a lot of maneuvering that goes on at these companies. And again,
Hmm.
this is where I think there's a missed opportunity because they are so big that this is where China and a lot of these larger, smaller organizations are running circles around them because again, this is how they function, right? I think as far as impact, like definitely internally, it was sort of like being part of this exclusive club too that I really admired because you are working with some of the best industrial designers like ever. And they're always like, "Oh, come to Stuttgart," and you go there and you look at the clay models and you look at how Willy Wonka, mixes his chocolate waterfall, right? And you have access to the Oompa Loompas in the Magic Kingdom there, right? And it's pretty incredible, right, to see.
It's interesting because on one hand, everybody knows that like in-house, as you just mentioned, there is a lot of politics, a lot of things happening besides, the craft, right? What makes you say that you felt more effective? Is it because you understood more context of what's going on?
Yeah. Definitely who has more power than other people, right? Who's actually the person who's going to sign off on the work and who's actually going to make sure that it gets executed the way that it was intended. I mean, there were times where I had meetings with design with my peers who were not digital designers or brand designers, who were industrial designers who believed in the work, believed in our work, and who were saying things like, "Oh, this other team or these other people are trying to change the work that you and I believe in." And they were very aware of, and they had more power, so ultimately it did get through, right, and it did get executed.
And so, what did you do in those situations? Like, what was your strategy? So, because essentially, what you're describing is having more of the context around the politics helped you to secure, to protect, right, the design and to push it forward, move it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that everyone needs to have champions, right?
Hmm.
We all need we know, regardless of whether or not we're doing design, I think we all need to have champions in our life, right? So you need to have, again, people who really believe in the work and believe in you and believe in, they actually, again, they feel like that they're part of the creative process. They own that work just as much as you own the work. And so this is where it's a really important, you need to make it feel like it was their, it's sort of like inception. You need to make sure that they think it's their idea just as much as it was your idea.
And were those champions when you started to work through Airlift? You did not have the same relationship with those
I
people?
did, I did, but I wasn't in Germany. I wasn't in Stuttgart. I wasn't. I had meetings every week with the head of design at Mercedes in the
Hmm.
morning, which was really funny because it was his end of day, which he was never in a very good mood. So he never liked anything that I did that we did, and so yeah, I mean, I just didn't have the like the inner workings of the machine as much.
Hmm.
It was more of
Hmm.
like, hey, we know Patrick and his company is like really good. We'll just have him work on some other ideas that like what's his opinion about AI, right? It's what's his opinion about, you know, they designed some crazy golf cart too. We did this whole like we designed a whole UI for a golf cart, which was kind of weird.
Hmm.
But we would get requests like that. It wasn't more of like this kind of larger political or larger sphere of kind of work that we were kind of moving.
So perhaps they were assigning work that was more experimental and like
Yes,
exploratory, as opposed to like, oh, this
definitely.
we're actually working
Product.
on this.
Yeah. It takes 7 to 9 years. I mean, Mercedes is literally working on cars that are almost 10 years out now. I mean, that's how crazy. And I will also say, like, it's not really only about aesthetics. It's also how are humans going to live? What type of climate are we going to be in? Right? Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cold? Are we going to be living in cities? Are humans living more towards cities? It's such an exhaustive amount of research that helps guide really to future proof the decisions that design is going to have 10 years out. And so then you work back from that into and so when you have these longer product cycles um, that that are not like really indicative of a lot of how digital products are made, you're gonna have a lot more opportunity again if you work for a company for those long product cycles, right? Because you're gonna see instead of like a 3 month cycle or a 2 month cycle or a 4 week cycle at an agency.
Hmm. Do you do 3D as well personally, hands on, or
I
no?
do occasionally. I play with it. I used it. I have used it, but I'm not nearly as good as. I mean, at Mercedes, I hired a lot of good 3D artists
Hmm.
because I was like, dude, there's no way we're going to get the lighting the way we need to. And
And you
it's
brought them
interesting
in. You brought them in house, or you did like
in house.
contracting? Uh huh.
Yeah,
Okay.
it took a while because they're like, well, why do you need 3D artists? I was like, well, dude, all of this work is in 3D. And all of my feedback from the head of design is like, the lighting is not right, the inclination surface isn't right, the texture is not right. I mean, all of this stuff, and I studied sculpture and fine art, but I'm not an industrial designer. That's not my trade, right? That's where using these 3D artists and also having them be a part of the project and early on again is like how do we do concepts, right? And how do we create a platform that's going to be totally made in 3D?
Yeah, that's super interesting. You surprised me when you said that you felt more effective in house, and but you also highlighted a very interesting and important reason, like why. Because the thing that makes us less effective, or what we perceive to be as less effective, right, how much overhead there is, how much meetings there are, right, but then that actually provides you with very important intel, right, that then you can use to actually make things happen if you are strategic. It's because when you're on the consulting side, technically, like, you have the freedom to bring anyone you want, right? Like, let's say you needed this type of skill, that type of skill, you can, make a couple of calls, have that person working on you, contracting tomorrow, or maybe you have that person already in house, you have the whole team right here, you can tell exactly what to do, and they will do exactly more or less what you want. Like, that is
Yeah.
amazing power, right? But
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I agree. But I was fortunate enough at Mercedes to be like, hey, I need a budget for another artist, or I need a budget for. I mean, I was very fortunate to have a boss there who
mhm.
I worked with at Xbox at Microsoft. So I built also an early Connect. We worked on Connect and also worked on the Xbox platform really early on with him. So he knew who I was. He knew my background was in art and design, and I didn't always I wasn't a color by numbers type of person, so he was very patient and kind of tried to give me the resources I needed to do the work.
Mhm.
So, but I think my ego liked Both things. I mean, I'm going to give you an answer. Like it liked being in house because, it was really surreal to work on something and then go to CES and then go to the booth where they're unveiling the software that you helped create. And
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
the idea of utilizing 3D architecture. I sat in it and they always have, I mean, because I worked at the CS booth at Mercedes for years, and the guy would came over and like, oh, this is all in 3D, and I'm like, yeah, I'm aware of that, right? It was very weird to be so not part of that
Yeah.
company, but have them be like, hey, we're doing it in 3D, isn't that cool? And it's like, yeah, I help, I mean, really in essence, our little team helped propel that whole concept, which I'm very proud
Yeah.
of. But and then as an outside vendor, as a contractor or an agency, really liked being them asking me like, hey, like, we really respect you, like, what's your opinion on these things, right? And so you can bring on and do all the crazy stuff right early on and kind of
Mm-hmm.
get away with it because you're not in those meetings and you're not like,
Yeah, so essentially, there is very high potential to do impact when you're in house. It sounds
mhm.
like there is also a lot of like kind of real pragmatic impact, like actually getting things over the finish line. That is honestly, I mean, what was my motivation to go and join in house myself, because I was at some point tired of concepts and designs not getting
Yeah.
implemented or things changing. At some point, it's tiring not to see things come to life, which is probably what all agencies, and design shops experience. I don't know. Is that common for you as well? Like to work on
Oh yeah.
something?
Yeah, I mean, you look back on the 30 years of doing design, all the crazy late nights and all the weekends and all the other crap that you had to do to get the work done. And you look at it and you really think about, okay, like what's the percentage I can put on things that have actually shipped? It's pretty low. I think a lot of designers will say that it's actually
Yeah.
fairly low, not unless you're, working with, Tim Cook and, Steve Jobs, and you're at the top at Apple, and, you're Johnny Ive. But I think as other designers function in the kind of the way the machine works, and I'm using these lovingly too in many ways, that a lot of the stuff that you do doesn't always ship. And so at Airlift, my wife and I were always very proud of the fact that a lot of the work that we have on our website did ship and is being used, because
Hmm.
we really, like so many companies, just do concept work, right? Or used to. I think it's becoming less common now, right? Because it's so expensive to hire companies for concepts.
I wanted to pull up one more project real quick, and I don't know, tell me what you think of this choice. Here you go.
Marshmello, there she is.
The reason I pulled it up is it's very different from everything else, right? Like the three projects like the third project that we opened, like the first one was a super complex product. Then Mercedes, the brand everybody knows. And this is a different type of work. Tell it a little bit about what was this project about.
Sure. I mean, I guess I have to let everyone know my obsessive curiosity with things is deep. Like I love learning about the world, and I think Arsenio, you and I are such good friends. I think that I love getting deep into things. The story is I we if you go to our homepage, you'll see like this massive 3D. I hired a really great team called Spectrum Studios. You'll see it briefly here in a second, but they actually did that right there. We built this whole 3D. They did all these 3D environments for us, but then I created a physical studio and we backlit it with this projector. I called a projector company in Los Angeles, and this guy answered, and I said, "Hey, I need this projector for 2 days," and he's like, "It costs this much," and I was like, "I don't need it a first class ticket on I just need it for 2 days." And so he walked outside. He's like, "I know what you're trying to do. What kind of music do you like?" And I was like, "Well, I like electronic music. I like Square Pusher. I like Aphex Twin. I like all these things." And he's like, "Okay, I'll drive it up to you." So he and I became friends. His name's Travis. And so
Hmm.
he's like, "Hey," he liked our work, and he was like, "Hey, like," I was like, "Yeah, I'd like to do some like crazy events, some crazy work." And he's like, "Well, what about Marshmello?" And I was like, "Sure." So we went to a concert. I met their VJ. I talked to them, and the project didn't pay for anything. I could barely pay the artists I work with and the people I worked with.
Hmm.
I mean, we lost money on it, but again, I wanted to see our work in an environment like these massive concerts. All these people are watching literally our graphics. There's like tens of thousands of people. We even did a Fortnite event for Marshmello using our
Hmm.
graphics. I was just really fascinated by kind of the experiential kind of element for design, and how that plays a role in kind of society and art and culture and all of that.
It's a silly question, but is it a similar satisfaction to doing having your work on stage with 10,000 people versus, shipping a component that is inside of a car? Like, do you compare those things?
I think they're all very interesting. Um, I mean, this was definitely more entertaining at the end because it's just like you go to these concerts and everyone has their. I mean, it's like thousands of people with their cell phones up filming
Yeah.
your graphics and filming Marshmallow and
Yeah.
filming these things. And it's not really about like, oh, it's not really about my ego or fueling that. It's more of like, this is surreal, and I'll
Hmm.
never forget this memory. And this is crazy. We're some design studio and in San Francisco, now in Japan, and wherever, because we're all remote. But I just, like I said, I just wanted to see how that would make me feel. how
Hmm.
how weird the world is, right? And the absurdity of everything. And so, and then we also, it was just fun for the studio because I do agree, I do like having things in a designer's life that is, they can do whatever they want. It's like it's a sandbox, you can play with
Yeah.
whatever. Look at this thing, right? So it really was a, I try and have one of those projects in the studio at any given time, and I try and make them really fun for everyone.
How do you have a definition of how you classify maybe this specialization of airlift, or do you even think about it? These days, it's popular to open, I don't know, healthcare oriented,
Yeah,
crypto oriented studio. Have you ever
yeah.
thought about that? And how do you view airlift?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed over 10 years, right? It was small, it was big. Now it's back to being a small studio. I think, yeah, it's changed a lot. The industry's changing. I mean, I think you have to adapt. I think we were always lucky that we could do anything we wanted. If we were not good at something, our motto was we get good at it early on and we do it. Right. I mean, we did a vertical takeoff and a landing electric aircraft too for Airbus. That story is really hilarious because I went to the German consulate and talked to a gentleman there. His name's Zach, who works for Airbus, and I said, like in the future, like in the Star Wars universe, I had a few drinks in me, but I said, in the Star Wars universe, there's traffic everywhere, right? If you go to like Coruscant, there's just lanes of traffic. This is super nerdy for everybody. I was like, but we have all these axes to fly in, and we have supercomputers and stuff. Like, don't you think there? Why is there traffic in space, in 3D space? And he started laughing, and so that's how we got this account. He and I became friends, and so we designed the interior and also worked on the exterior graphics for it, which was really difficult, actually.
Amazing. Yeah, this looks so good.
Yeah, it was pretty
You
crazy.
have Mercedes, Nissan, then aerospace. Like, is there a theme with transportation there, or
Yeah, yeah, I
yeah?
think so because I mean, people knew me as the transportation person, right, for at
Mm.
Mercedes, right? And when MBUX came out, and which was the name of the platform that we just talked about at Mercedes, when that came out, people were like, "Oh, Patrick and his team worked on it, airlifted it." So, and a lot of my peers at Mercedes left Mercedes to work on other projects. So we worked with like Volkswagen Group, we worked on Porsche stuff, we worked on Audi stuff, we worked on Alexis, Kia, like the new Kia branding. We worked on that. That's not even on the website. That was a
Mm.
whole bunch of work that we did. So transportation, I suppose, was a pretty big part of our company for years.
So you have experience working in-house. You opened your own agency. Then you also, you moved to Japan
Yeah,
and kind of had a big shift in your life and values. What are you excited about these days? How do you view work and the future? Like, what are you? Yeah, where are you at
yeah.
now?
I mean, I'm really. That is a really good question, Arseni. I have more Earth rotations underneath my belt now as I get older, and um, I'm very very lucky and very blessed to have had the experiences I did. I think the thing that I want to stress on a lot of listeners and viewers is just the amount of energy and like a mental and physical toil, like starting an agency in one of the most competitive markets, as you know, Arseni, having, your
Yeah.
own agency, how we met. I think you and I really confided in each other early on because it is extremely stressful doing anything. It's fun, but it's certainly not every day is like, beer and Skittles, right? So it's going to have its own challenges, right? And I guess it's sort of the kind of morbid fascination with starting a company is just building and growing it and building the culture and scaling it and trying to do everything that comes along with it, right? And protecting it and taking care of it and maintaining it. I mean, it's just a lot. So now I think if you're asking a question like what is it now, I moved here about 2 years ago, and I'm still very much doing airlift, and but again, it's more on a case by case basis, and I will admit I burn out big time. I mean, after COVID, um, 20 early 2020, right before COVID, actually, I was just totally burned out then, and then COVID hit, and then I had to keep the company going, and I did all through COVID. And so the last 2 years have been more about what I need, who I am, what motivates me, and really like what satisfaction I get, because when you're going 180 miles an hour all the time, you don't really take time to step back and really look at like even enjoy this, because I definitely was motivated by um, getting really good and really obsessively too much to the point where you get blinded by the simple things and like really in essence the moment itself. And so that in itself right now, what I'm motivated by, what I am, I'm still, frankly, I'm still trying to figure it out and process it, because we did so much work in 10 years, that 8 9 years, 10 years, that it almost took like a literally all last year just to like sit and process all the stuff that happened, because I was probably working about 90 hours a week, and I was
Wow.
working on 3 or 4 projects at a time, which I felt like finals week every week. I mean, I did that for years. We had massive, massive, massive pressure. I had pressure on myself. And we worked for Mercedes, we worked for Volkswagen Group, we worked for Zeiss, and not so much. I mean, Zeiss was a lovely client. All of them are lovely, but these are big, big companies with a lot of responsibility. There was no margin for error because we bootstrapped the company. I mean, my wife and
Hmm.
I started it from nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. I mean, we had maybe 1 or 2 accounts. I sold the small condo I had in San Francisco. I slept on an air mattress, I mean, it was a lot of, a friend of mine who worked for Apple and had an extra bedroom. And he's like, yeah, just sleep here, stay here. I got rid of everything because I poured everything into the company. And that in itself was a whole thing to process. As I said, it's now like later today, I work at a temple 1 day a week. I'm going to
Hmm.
go there and I'm learning every day. I'm learning Japanese. And last week I cleaned a graveyard, like 600 years of 800 years of Japanese history in this graveyard next to the temple. And they're explaining like who these people are and how important. I'm really trying to embrace the moment more and embrace really the act of creating. Honestly, like I'm getting back into charcoal drawing. I'm getting way more into photography than I ever have in a long time. Design is still there. It's still part of my who I am, but I don't want it to define my identity so much anymore, as much,
Hmm.
right? Because as you know, like no one ever asks, like, so tell me about yourself and who you are, and how many times people, well, I'm a designer, or I'm a musician, or I'm a, architect, right? And I don't know. I don't want my career to define every single facet of who I am as much anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I can definitely resonate. I think for me, designer is still part of the identity in many ways, and I don't know. I kind of feel okay with it. I look at things. I perceive it in a kind of in a broad sense, like not necessarily product designer. Or I think design has a nice thing that can be applied to multiple facets of life. even without doing graphic design or web design or whatever, just kind of the way of maybe thinking, or at least maybe I'm bullshitting myself, I don't know. What's
Maybe.
your, maybe, as we like as we wrap up in the next couple of minutes, how do you know when design is finished?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you've exhausted all possible permutations of the question and you've really struggled with the problem and you've really taken the time to really be humble and unpack the problem so much that you're trying to solve, that's when I feel like design's done, right? And you've worked through so many different scenarios on how it could fail and how it could be effective. I mean, when you've worked your best, you've done your best and you've worked the hardest on something. I mean, we know. I mean, just be honest with yourself, you'll know. And so I think that's where design is different than art, because when you're doing a painting or doing a charcoal drawing, if you make one more mark, that you can destroy the work, right? And design, I don't really see that. You can always go back, to something that was a better solution to something that you're trying to solve. And my friend Peter Sinek and I always joke that usually the first solution that we had was the right one, but we have to go through weeks of work to validate it. Sometimes we'll present the work to the client. And they're like, "Oh, I love that. I love that logo." And we're like, "Yeah, let's just not get too attached to it. Let's do our process." And we do this huge thing and then we go back to it. And of course, it's the one that, um, but again, we had to go through
But now
that,
you
right?
know,
To
but
really,
now you know. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
And another question I have, it's a big theme, but I'm curious to get your general take. So, right now, a lot of new AI tools emerge that allow everyone to create apps, products with just a couple of prompts. Some say it's a great time that empowers everybody, making things more accessible. Some say we're just
Yeah.
going to have a ton of shitty products around. Like, what's your take on that, and where do you see the role of design evolving? What is the future of it?
Are we doomed? Is that what you're asking? Or sinning?
Are we?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this at one point as well, not today, but we've had conversations around the democratization of technology. And we look at photography, right? I mean, everyone's a photographer. Everybody's a photographer. It's hard. I could probably move to Los Angeles and become a method actor easier, I'm guessing. I mean, I literally, because there's so many people doing photography, right? So you have the democratization of that technology and the advent of the phone, the iPhone, right? And everyone having access to a camera in their pocket. So that's pretty amazing, right? And so if we look at that and we really unpack that, on one hand, it's made it better because everyone has access to becoming a visual person, and that's amazing. Like, making work. And but then there's this other side where I find that so many of my peers and friends who are making really incredibly fascinating, really stellar work, it's like you get lost in a sea of information, and it's harder to raise above those all of that mediocre work. That, no offense to a lot of people, but not anyone can take a photo, right? Not everyone can take a great, stellar, incredible photo. Not just like, oh, that's a pretty picture of a tree. There's something that really resonates in your human soul, right? That really affects you. And so I guess I'm only using this as a parallel to design in many ways, where technology and design, you have, as we've talked about, machine learning and artificial intelligence, everyone having access to that. And we are going to have a sea of information, that a wave of apps that are going to be coming our way. I will say, mean, I have used these things. I am generating websites using AI. They really are not very good. They're just not yet. I don't know if they ever will be, frankly. I mean, there's so much more nuanced psychology that goes in to really understanding human behavior that design brings to the table, where the conversation, the human spirit, touching another human spirit and talking about design. I do believe that there's always going to be a need for that. And I don't think these systems can replace that aspect of humans really working with other humans to build things. I mean, these things are tools, right? At the end of the day. So the process is going to be slightly easier and faster, but will it be better? Again, I think the jury's still out for that, right? And I don't think it will ever be totally effective, frankly. I think
Yeah.
it's going to make our job a lot harder, though, because so many people are like, well, it's a logo, right? I kind of like it, right? And so they're not able to validate
Exactly.
those decisions.
Exactly, like to your earlier point about how about minimizing risk, right? And choosing the path that's been already traveled, because that's just, that's going to work. And so to some extent AI can like really amplify that. That's kind of the nature of it, right? Like replicating already existing patterns. And so there is a bit of that risk of just becoming even more further standardized, and people will be accepting it actually as a norm. Kind of like if you are, if you live in a city with, houses all looking the same way, and they're not really that great of houses, and you never traveled to another country to see what's out there, you're kind of like, well, that's just the way it is and I'm going to accept it. So there is a bit of that risk. And
Yeah.
it's almost like I'm a little worried that it sounds like we as designers sounds like did not a very great job explaining what it is that we do, and the value that we bring to
Yeah.
the table. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to
Well,
do that now better.
yeah, designers are so ill-equipped communicators, honestly. I think we talked about this too. Like I so many usually in your second, third, fourth, fifth year of doing design, you're barely able to communicate. I'll be honest. Like why does this you always assume I'm presenting this to another designer and they really should know my craft and who I am and who why I made the decisions. Like they should know. How would they not know? These people you're presenting to do not know anything about design. I guarantee it. So I don't think our schools, our institutions are do a good job at all teaching people how to talk about design, how to validate it, how to defend it, how to justify the decisions you made, how to really sell it. I mean, there's so many facets of this that I was very fortunate to learn early on. I had fantastic mentors who were trying to beat it into me. Like, people do not know why you made this. You better defend it because they're just no one's going to know, right? So I agree with you. Like we need to do a better job of really talking to the world and really kind of, I mean, this is the reason why I love your show and I love the fact that you're trying to bring more um uh, like awareness to craft and what it means to make and what it means to be a creative person or a designer or whomever.
Yeah, thank you. I think that at the end, you just laid out a potentially another episode that maybe we'll do about how to communicate, because that is a that is a theme that I'm also hearing. And it's funny,
Yeah.
like when we had a recording with one of the previous guests, and when we finished recording, that person said, it's going to be really boring. Designers are the worst, like storytellers, and the worst communicators. Like
They really
and
are. Yeah.
and so that's the funny thing. It's like, in my mind, I think, every design book that you pick up, like the staple design book, is like design and visual communication. Like, and it's almost like, I think maybe a lot of designers by definition think like, well, I'm a designer, so I'm probably a great communicator. I'm a visual communicator. But like, there may be a missing link there. And
Well, it's the mouth
yeah.
more than anything, right? It's definitely the mouth. The hands are there for designers, but the mouth is definitely, and maybe sometimes the ears, but the eyes and the hands are the ones that designers use the most, right? And not so much the mouth and the ears.
Yeah. So, yeah, next time we'll maybe talk about strategies for articulating
Yeah.
design decisions and how to explain things. I think it would be awesome to talk
But
about. Thank you so much, Patrick.
yeah.
Where should people go to find more about you?
Just go to weareairlift.com, weareairlift. That's weareairlift.com. So you can email me, Patrick at weareairlift.com. I'm around, but yeah, that's actually the best way to see the work, see my life for the last 10 years with a lot of really talented designers who worked there and still work with me. And beyond that, look for more work. It's coming up.
Yeah, excited to see it. Thank you so much for coming on, and have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the day. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Arseni. My video's crawling right now.
Mine too, but I think it should be fine. Our Starlinks are going to do the job and upload the videos, so I think it should be
Okay.
fine.